Thanks, Ken. You'll notice I'm not in the program. Lanny Leach, who was supposed to be here, he got called to the World Equestrian Games, where most of the equestrian world is right now, to participate in the Extreme Mustang Makeover there. I would have really enjoyed hearing about him, but I told Patty that I would pinch hit a little bit here and talk a little bit about horses and our bond with horses and those types of things. In my past, let's see if I can get this open. I was going to load this during the break, so got it. And then now we'll see if the videos run. In my past, some people ask me, how did you get to be the Director of Industry Outreach with the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association? I don't think any of the little girls grow up and say, oh, I want to be the Director of Industry Outreach for Pro Rodeo. Interestingly enough, and I think it's important for us to, understand everybody's history here, my sister won a pony in a coloring contest. That's how I got involved in the sport of horses. That's how I got started with horses, and probably in a lot of states now that's illegal to actually give away ponies or any other type of animal in a contest. So, and some of the other things that I've done is I have run the American Youth Horse Council, which gave me a lot of insight and a lot of background research on how horses do play a role in humans' lives, and that's a very important part. But I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, as we've heard a lot of really good information about animal-human bond. What I feel like I'm the expert in is how this horse and human bond affects how we handle things within the horse industry and some of the challenges it might give, because the human-animal bond is great, but I think a lot of us have seen some of the challenges that happened in our industry when maybe people take that to the extreme. So I don't want to pretend to be an expert on something I'm not, so I'm going to talk about some of the horse stuff that I understand. And we've always seen this quote, there's something about the outside of a horse that's good for the inside of a man or a woman. And I like to take things that people may not have seen, and you'll see the gentleman on the left, he's a former National Finals Rodeo bronc rider, and that's his horse. He's what we call a pickup man in rodeo. And he goes, when the Cowboys are done riding their bronc, he goes and gets them off their horse. And there's definitely, you could tell there's a bond there with his horse, and there's different bonds. And you'll look on the right, and the rather homely little pony in the living room, that's me. Shortly, a couple of years after my sister won the pony, I got a pony of my own. And this is Trigger, and although he wasn't the most beautiful pony in the world, I certainly thought he was. And the things we can learn, this pony kept coming up to the back sliding glass door when I was a kid, and my mom's like, well, let's just see if he wants to come in the house. So we brought Trigger in the house, and certainly looks like he had been there the entire time, wasn't stressed out, obviously trusted that I was there with him. And the funny thing about Trigger was, I love Trigger and we got along really well, but as a lot of you know, with your dogs and other animals, someone else would try and get on Trigger and he would take off and they couldn't stop him. And so I learned the human-animal bond, especially with horses, very young. This is a movie, and I'll see if this comes up. This is a trailer a lot of you may have already seen for the movie Secretariat. And I want you to look at this in the context of what it's about, the movie, and if you go back to Seabiscuit, it's not as much about the horse as it is about the human-animal bond.
Horse breeding operation, you need a certain touch. You're a housewife.
I feel like I could make something work.
Yes, this is a gentleman's club, miss.
I need a good trainer just to get things stabilized.
You need a Lucian Lauren. Dresses like Superfly. He's trying to retire.
I'm tired of babysitting half-ton animals who are stubborn as their owners are. Any other questions?
How much did you spend on that hat?
How would you like to see a horse being born?
Have you ever seen that?
What?
Colt stand up that fast?
Well, Mr. Lauren, what do you think?
I think he eats too much. He lays against the back of that starting gate like he's in the Caribbean.
Secretariat is not afraid. and neither am I.
Horse racing is unforgiving for housewives.
It's like every other multi-million-dollar gamble we housewives make every day. All right then, let's show them what you're made of.
We're out of time. We need $6 million.
We just lost a race that we could not afford to lose.
You're guaranteeing that this horse is going to win the Triple Crown. 3 races, 3 states, in just 5 weeks. Hasn't been done in 25 years.
You're that stubborn.
I'm that right.
So as you can see, it's more about the people involved with Secretariat and this woman that believed in this horse so much that she wanted to show what he could do. So, I think that it's a lesson for us all to look and to watch that movie and see how that horse affected all those people's lives. And what I think is really important, and lessons that I'll talk about more, is that it's okay for a horse to make a living. And it's okay for animals to make a living. And that's, what I come up against every day, and I think a lot of us do. It's not against the betterment of the animals for them to make a living. And you can utilize that human-animal bond to make it more successful. So what are the characteristics of horses that make them, so successful in our lives? And I think when you look at all the different jobs that they've been adapted to, again, racehorses are, to me, some of the original breeding programs. But if you look at the bottom left slide, that's a really nice bucking horse named Graded Coconut. And what has happened in the horse industry, and I've talked about this before, is most people don't want their horses to buck. They have bred that out of most horses. So in the rodeo industry now, there's we breed that into horses, and this horse's mother actually bucks at the National Finals Rodeo, generally in the same performance that he does. So we're utilizing these specialized breeding programs. We've got embryo transplant and DNA testing and all types of things with our horses, whether it be for cross-country jumping, racing, or in the sport of rodeo. And even though we're breeding specific things into them, we know that with that horse and human bond, we can make those horses do things that sometimes they may not be bred specifically to do. And that's what the interesting thing to me about what I do in rodeo is I explain to people, you can't train a horse to do this. We possibly could train him not to do it. And in the sport of rodeo, a lot of our horses that don't end up bucking to be in the ability of a professional rodeo, they may end up being a pickup horse like you saw earlier or some other things. So you can train some of those. But if you take the genetics and you take that human-animal bond like Secretariat and you make magic. And that's what people want to see, is they want to see that end result. And that's why we all keep trying, and we keep up with spending all of our money on our dogs and our horses and our cats and those types of things, because we want that perfect marriage of the breeding programs and that human-animal bond. The really important thing that that when I was researching this is to understand that horses are prey animals. And what we do with horses so many times is so difficult, and for us to create that human-animal bond, because we're very scary to them. They're first, and Meg, I think, was talking about, in the horse whisperer demonstrations and the horse trainer demonstrations, that's what it's all about, is getting that horse to trust you enough and to work against their prey instinct. And then you go to the other side of the coin. We have to go away from our predator instinct and find ways to make the animal trust us so we can get things done. And a lot of things that we naturally have to do, we have to change our ways of doing to be successful with horses. There's a lot of jobs that you can have working with horses, but in every job that you have to have that successful bond to make it happen. And one of the most successful programs that I've heard of is, you'll see below, is that's the program at the prison in Canyon City, where they match up the Mustangs with the prisoners. And that is really an excellent example of both the animal and the human benefiting from the bond that it takes for some of these guys that really don't know anything about horses to come in, and they have to throw away a lot of the stuff, their baggage in their life, and trust that horse, and vice versa when you take horses off the range. and people in prison that may not trust anyone. That's, to me, a really good example of how important it is, that bond between humans and horses. And, I'll talk a lot about the difference between what we're doing now with horses and what we've done, when they first came into society, and how different it is, and what a challenge that is to the horse industry. And just like it's a challenge to folks in the dog industry and those types of things, to make people understand that sometimes maybe this isn't only your pet, you do other things with it. People just don't understand what it takes to care for a horse. They don't they see the movies like Secretariat and want to go out and get a horse, just like they saw, the movie with the Dalmatians and want to go get Dalmatians. And a lot of times that may challenge us. But today is definitely a challenging time for us to try and find that balance between teaching people how much work it is to take care of a horse and telling them, oh yeah, you need a horse. What we can learn from horses, and it's a lot. I like this quote from an article by Matthew Brundle. He says, "They say that a dog is a man's best friend. That must mean that a horse is a partner. A horse requires 3 components for successful relationship. You must earn each one sincerely. They're TLC, trust, leadership, and communication. Every interaction must be spoken eloquently, like you mean it." And again, when we go back to that bond, it's so important that we learn from them as well as they learning from us. I want to go into talking a little bit about the horse industry and taking all of the things that we learned about and using them as far as the human-horse bond. Why is the horse industry so important, and where is it going utilizing some of these things? It contributes $39 million in direct economic impact to the U.S. economy and supports 1.4 million jobs on a full-time basis. This was according to the American Horse Council. When indirect and induced spending are included, it's a $102 billion industry. It also estimates that there are 9.2 million horses in the United States now. 2 million people are involved with horses as volunteers or through a family affiliation. And there was an organization years ago that I was involved in called the Horse Industry Alliance, and it was a group that was wanting to try and take that human-horse bond and market the horse, and we got some good information, just never, as I'm sure everybody in any industry can relate, never quite got it together to find the funding to take the horse industry and advertise it on 60 Minutes and advertise it. But they did find out when they did a survey that a third of the U.S. population surveyed wants to be or are involved in horses. So that's a strong number, and a lot of that does have to do with what people see on television in the movies, and because people see horses as so majestic. And here is probably what the majority of people think of when you talk about your average horse owner. They think of their horse as a companion, and that's one of the challenges we'll talk about later. But when you look at people that have horses in their backyard, they consider them very similar to as their dogs. Horses at work. I had a picture go crazy there. This, to me, is what a lot of us have to try and get across to the public. It's okay for a horse to have a job, and it's important for a lot of horses to have jobs. And for them to have a job raises the value, therefore raises the level of welfare in many cases, as long as that job has standards for the care of the animals. I don't know if you ask somebody, this rancher out herding cattle, if he has a different feeling about his horse as the little girl hugging. It's a different feeling, but there's no doubt that there's a bond there. And I just want to make sure everybody understands you all have a horse. So in case you felt left out of the conversation, we're going to talk about your horses. You all have a horse, approximately 38,000 wild horses and burros on public lands, and another 34,000 in the holding pens. And this is another issue that a lot of the general public knows about, but don't understand exactly things that are going on within the wild horse population and that the government is paying. The projected cost for taking care of your horses this year by the BLM is $38 million. And that are basically the ones in captivity. They're held in feedlots and some pasture-type environments. And all of this came from the 1971 Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. So along with the rest of the industry, the Bureau of Land Management is always looking for ways to market those animals also. And I think the wild horse, to some of us in the industry, we think it might be a little misleading because they're not indigenous to our planet. They were extinct, and then they came over with the explorers. And the horses the Mustangs that we talk about, those were ones that were brought to the New World and escaped and started breeding. And then we have those herds of horses, and then some burros that were used for working are included in that. So that, again, adds into, I think a lot of people in the U.S. feel a certain bond with these wild horses because they are on our public lands. They are majestic. I mean, that's the picture right there that people want to think of when they think of wild horses, is running free, beautiful animals. The horses as therapy tools is something that has really been emerging, and when you talk about any animal as a therapy tool, I think they can be very, very helpful. The National Association for the Riding for Handicapped, they're based here in Denver, and they've really taken this to a different level. And when you look at therapy horses, it's not only with handicapped children anymore. They are using it with soldiers and any number of different types of people. And I was interested talking to Ken last night that his daughter actually runs a program up in Jackson Hole, and they're using it not just with handicapped children. They use it with at-risk children, similar to the prison population I talked about, hoping to keep kids out of prison by building that. I do have a video here, and I think this is, we'll see if this runs. Yeah, it doesn't.
Every year, more children and adults with disabilities whose lives, limbs, and language are limited are positively impacted by the opportunity to ride a horse. Whether it be autism, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, Down syndrome, spina bifida, or other disability, horses are making a measurable impact on their lives. Through the generosity of Farnham, the American Quarter Horse Foundation is committed to sharing America's horse with those who need him.
When you know you're only one step away, but it seems like miles, and the pain comes with each passing day. You do it all with a smile, eyes open wide, and a heart filled with pride. You can sign love and ride, reach for the sky. You can fly without wings, let your spirit go. Whatever life brings, you can take control. Don't ever look down and never give up, 'cause you wear the crown and rule the world with your love. You can rise above the storm and whatever life brings, you can fly without wings. The courage is the chance that you take to get back on that horse, and the dream may be the one you embrace. When it's time to set your course, you may be tossed and turned like a ship at sea, but the lesson you learn is gonna set you free. You can fly without wings, let your spirit go. Whatever life brings, you can take control. Don't ever look down and never give up, 'cause you wear the crown and rule the world with your love. You can rise above the storm
pretty amazingly powerful stuff.